Greetings and welcome to Unit 12 of Module 1 on outcome based learning. In the present unit is related to affective domain. In the earlier unit we addressed the issue of metacognitive knowledge and we looked at the nature and even importance of metacognitive knowledge, especially when you have relatively or students with relatively poor cognitive abilities. The role of metacognitive knowledge greatly increases. If you do not pay attention to this dimension, then the student performance can become very poor. Present unit, namely related to affective domain, we try to understand the nature and importance of affective domain in learning. What should be clear is that any type of activity that we are involved, whether meeting a person or even walking on the road or trying to read a book, or more importantly listening to something in the classroom, anything that we are involved, there is always a feeling or sometimes an emotion involved in that. We many times use the word we do not feel up to that, or sometimes we have a strong emotion associated with that, like or dislike emotion with anything that when we are interacting with the outside world. So having feelings and emotions is a natural process with all our interactions with the outside world, and affective domain addresses this particular issue of feelings and emotions associated with our interaction with the outside world. So let us look at the factors that are strictly non-cognitive. Till now we have been looking at cognitive activities in terms of cognitive processes and knowledge, but if you look at some non-cognitive factors, it has been fairly all the researchers in this area firmly believe that non-cognitive factors and skills are equally or even more important than cognitive aspects in educative processes. Let us take an example. When the teacher starts a lecture, if the students for some reason is not even willing to pay attention, leave alone subsequent ability to understand, not understand, for some reason he has a negative feeling about the whole thing, he will not pay even attention. If he does not pay attention, there is no possibility of his learning anything from that. So what can happen is, this is a strictly a feeling or a sometimes can be a strong emotion. That itself can almost like act as a gate to prevent any kind of even a small element of learning is also kind of does not become possible if I am not willing to pay attention. Now that is, attention is only one aspect, but there are a whole lot of factors like grit, tenacity, curiosity, attitudes, self concept, self efficacy, anxiety coping strategies, motivation, perseverance, confidence are among the many of the frequently referred what we call non-cognitive factors. All these words are used by different people to represent many things. These words like grit, tenacity, curiosity, they are not completely mutually excluding words. There can be overlap in the kind of in the area they are dealing with, but they are all non-cognitive factors, and many of these factors fall into the affective domain, and that is where it becomes very important. Now we call it affective conflict. Now let us look at, not necessarily in the classroom, an individual growing in a dynamic, pluralistic, urban industrial society. That is what we have in India. It is dynamic, pluralistic and urban industrial society encounters a fast changing set of circumstances. Even a few years you already start referring to your senior student as what do you call father or grandfather kind of thing. Even 3 years, 4 years are making a lot of difference between the experiences the people go through. And what happens, young persons are confronted by a variety of experiences which were not part of pre-adult experiences of elders. Now if you talk about parents and children, there is a much bigger age gap. So what happens, parent, while they would like to take care of their children, but they have not gone through any of the experiences that the children are going through. Now adults may become confused as they attempt to reconcile their own past inconsistencies and contradictions. Such confusions are easily communicated to the younger generation. When parents are confused, obviously those confusions also get transferred to the children, and such climate is not conducive to healthy psychological development. For example, as a parent, I may not even know how to handle the what do you call the strong and all pervading influence of a cell phone on youngster. I do not know how to even I may know that it is not healthy, but I do not know how to handle that. So affective education has a significant role to resolve this problem. That means the conflicts that students go through in their life because of the fast changing set of circumstances create conflict within each individual, and affective education can in principle address this particular conflict and help to resolve this problem. You cannot guarantee the solution, but at least it helps in resolving this problem. Now coming to affective domain per se is most commonly associated with feelings and emotions, is usually displayed in the form of positive or negative reaction to given events, objects, behaviors, policies or situations. Our reactions are usually displayed in the form of either positive or negative reaction. First level is positive or negative, and right now our knowledge of the brain from neuroscience clearly indicates that there is a immediately any information that comes, there is a, you can say, a sign associated with that, either positive or negative, and also there appears to be the degree of positiveness and degree of negativeness also associated with that. How strong the reaction, positive or negative reaction, that seems to happen right away whenever there is sensory inputs coming. That seems to be part of the making of the brain itself. And now our reaction can be to the event that is occurring in front, or events that we are becoming aware of, either through the newspapers or the TVs or any other information are happening in front of us, or objects, behaviors, policies or situations. So for anything and everything, our first level reaction is positive or negative, or and also there is a degree of strength associated with positive and negative reaction. That much has been established by neuroscience. Now that is what we say, affective behaviors are accompanied by varying degrees of feelings. That is what I was talking about, positive or negative. One is positive and negative, and there could be other feelings. Reflect the distinct approach or avoidance of predispositions. So, what happens depending on our feelings, either you approach certain event or an object or avoid that particular object. So, that is the reaction that you do not want to attend such and such a lecture, or I do not like this subject. These are the types of things many people have that. Even a good student may not have equal liking for all subjects. Strictly speaking, all subjects, there is nothing like good or bad about them. Okay. All subjects are, you can say, are equally good or equally important, but still students do have this positive and negative feeling about subjects, which is within the student, not with the subject. Okay. So, what happens if I do not like the subject, I do not want to spend time on that, or I try to minimize my involvement with that. Okay. Person's past experience in interacting with environment shapes the nature and scope of affective responses. Obviously, we are what we are depending on our genetic makeup as well as the experiences that we have been going through since our birth. So, to that extent, our affective responses will differ from individual to individual. So, this is one type of description of affective domain as per Pierce and Gray. Now, these are the few words that one has to be familiar with. We called it affective domain. So, what is an affect? Is any type or degree of positive or negative feeling toward environmental circumstances expressed by means of observable display of emotive, reactive or evaluative behavior. So, what is observed? The teacher can observe the affect through the kind of emotion or the reaction or the evaluative behavior displayed by the students. And affect itself is any type or degree of positive or negative feeling. So, that is what is affect. Now, there are two things which I am sure that everybody uses these words, sometimes knowingly or not fully knowing them. Attitudes are largely unexamined inclinations or dispositions for or against particular objects, ideas or actions. They serve as general feeling indicators that usually influence behavior. Okay. So, everybody has attitudes. Attitudes means you need not take it as very positive or negative. It is essentially unexamined inclinations, because one may have energy or time, may not have enough time to examine each type of inclination or disposition. So, something that I have reacted, I like or do not like, and I behave accordingly based on that. Whereas values are tested dispositional insights for or against particular objects, ideas and actions. That means, we have tested these insights and then we have made, rather we came to conclusions based on systematic what you call exploration of something. Now, these things might have come through our training at home or in the schools or colleges, or by our own explorations with people or with circumstances. You can say value is something what we consider important, an individual considers important. How does he consider important? When someone values something, he or she assigns worth to it with reference to goals and purposes. For example, goals of A and B can be quite different. So, what happens, what A values and what B values can be different. So, values can also be different between two different individuals. Now, values, for example, enjoying, conserving, respecting, supporting, these are examples only, serve as specific guides for consistent behavior. See, I do not have to be being asked by some person all the time if I value something. It becomes my second nature. Like respecting nature, respecting cleanliness, these are all values if I have somehow imbibed, not necessarily as an attitude, but if I acquire it as a value, it gets reflected in my behavior in a consistent manner. So, these are the three words one should really understand to get to know more about affective domain. Now, let us say all activities in all the three domains involve three stage processes. One is there is sensory input. It comes from any one of the 5 senses. There is sensory input. The sensory inputs go to the brain and the brain processes this information in various domains, right. We are not going to those processes, how they happen, and then as a consequence of that there is an output created. So, this is a 3-step process that whether it is cognitive, affective or psychomotor, it happens. So, what happens is, while there are several taxonomies of affective domains in the literature, Pierce and Gray, they use this 3-step process of how the brain functions as a basis for creating taxonomy. To that extent, we have 6 cognitive levels. So, here also Pierce-Gray taxonomy of affective domain also identifies 6 affective levels. And what the main difference between affective domain and cognitive domain is, of course, we are looking at the kind of affective processes that go through, but there is, we try to establish a correspondence between cognitive levels and affective levels. And also another assumption is, as we go up in the higher and higher affective levels, there is higher and higher cognitive activity also associated with that. This is an assumption made, and at least till now that seems to hold good for many activities. Now, the Pierce-Gray taxonomy of affective domain identify these 6 levels, like the one we talked about, like remember, in cognitive domain, remember, understand, apply, like that. Here we talk about perceive, react, conform, validate, affective judge and affective create. We for each area, each level, we are identifying 2 sub processes, as we have seen in the case of cognitive level also. Under each category we had some sub processes identified. Okay. So, in the same way there are sub processes to understand each process a little more in detail. We will not go through the sub process in great detail, but just you would like you to note that there are sub processes in each one of the 6 affective levels. Let us look at each one of these to a limited extent. We are not going to get into the depth. The purpose of bringing the affective domain is predominantly to sensitize the teachers to the role of this, and if one wants to spend to really make use of this into your instructional methods, you have to spend a little more time than merely 1 unit of this course. In perceive, the for example, if a student shuts down something, he in the sense he is not interested even in listening to that because of various reasons, that means you are not even crossing the first stage. So, perceiving includes listening to others' point of view. Let us say we take one example, one particular thing, ethical issues in genetics and biotechnology. I am sure several biology courses will address this issue. So, we just use this as a platform for to understand various affective levels. First of all, I may or may not have any view of the ethical issues. So, if I am not even willing to listen, I cannot even perceive. So, the first level is willing to listen to others' point of view. Not only willingness, but I am listening to others' point of view. Okay. And some you can use any of these action verbs. Here we said listen, or ask, choose, describe, follow, give, hold, and so on. You will find that some of these action verbs will also be common across, like in earlier case, across multiple affective levels. And the second one is react. That is, first thing is you are willing to listen, and then you not only willing to listen, you actually listen. Then you are willing to react. Sometimes I listen to something, but I am not interested in pursuing it or doing anything further. Yes, I have listened to somebody, keep it, whether I may remember or may not remember, but that is where it ends. The next level is react. That again, examples like this, the student or the person discusses the nature of his or her past and present reactions to the ethical issues in genetics and biotechnology. That means he is willing to discuss, this is how he thought about it, or this is what he is thinking about it, and so he is willing to, he is not only willing to discuss, he actually discusses this. Or another variant of this, discusses with classmates whether or not he or she should continue to react in the same way to the ethical issues in genetics and biotechnology. What means he is going one step further, the student is willing to go one step further, he is asking, is discussing whether he or she should continue to react in the same way. Another level, one more step further, the student is willing to assist teammates in resolving ethical issues in genetics and biotechnology. This is just another incremental step forward. In the sense, you are not saying this is the way it has to be behaved, anything else is nonsense. Obviously, you cannot assist others in resolving ethical issues in genetics and biotechnology. So, this is levels, as you can see, there are 3 levels of reaction in this, and here you will see some of the verbs are, action verbs are common: answer, assist, aid, comply, conform, discuss, greet, and so on. Now, let us look at another one, next level, conform. You are going one step forward, justify the position he or she has taken regarding the use of genetic experimentation from an ethical point of view. Now, earlier you are willing to share and willing to discuss. Now, you are going further, you are trying to justify, you are arguing why that particular position is appropriate from an ethical point of view. And further, another incremental level is display commitment to using ethical standards when resolving ethical problems in genetics and biotechnology. You are displaying commitment to using, that means whatever that I do in the laboratory or whatever kind of problems I am trying to address, I am displaying commitment to using those ethical standards. I am conforming. to the ethical standards that are presently in practice. So, here are some action verbs: complete, demonstrate, differentiate, explain, follow, form, initiate, and so on. So, the next level, third level, is really conform. Then validate. Though you are following, for example, I may follow certain standard because it has to be followed, but I am not fully convinced of all the provisions in the, let us say, that ethical standard. Now, next level, I write a 2-page paper explaining why he or she intends to maintain, revise or discard his or her present stance on the current genetic experimentation from an ethical point of view. So, as you can see, either one is willing to maintain this current standard or revise or discard. For whatever you do, you are providing reasons for it. That means you are explaining in great detail based on the data or assumptions that you make. You are willing to do if you are doing that, then you are going through the process of validation. And another activity related to this is adhere to ethical standards in discussing issues in genetic and biotechnology, issues related to genetics and biotechnology. That means you are willing to adhere to the ethical standards. That means when you are discussing, you are now have taken a position with respect to ethical standards and defending it and arguing within that context. So, these are some action verbs like explain, follow, justify, propose, read, report, etc. Then comes the affective judge. Obviously, different people take different stands, especially regarding, let us say, these ethical issues in biotechnology. And if you say the animal lovers, there is a society which protects animal rights, and the scientists who actually do the experiments in biology and maybe public, they all may have different views on this. So, that means people implicitly or explicitly have taken multiple stands on these ethical issues. So, here given multiple stands taken on ethical issues on genetics and biotechnology by different groups, how do you even want to compare them? How do you take a stand? That means you are developing some criteria based on which one can judge the ethical issues. That means judging first involves identifying criteria and also applying those criteria. As you can see now, the language starts becoming very similar to that of what you call evaluate process of cognitive domain. You have to develop criteria and you are willing to apply those criteria. So, those are the two activities involved in affective judge. So, action verbs again: adhere, alter, arrange, combine, develop, complete, defend, and so on. Mind you, the statement that is given is only an example, it is not all. So, one can use any of these action verbs to write to an activity related to affective judge with respect to a specific course. Here we are using a biology program as the basis for creating these examples. Now, the next level, affective create, now it is practically coincides with that of cognitive create. Prepare a report that attempts to present his or her own ethical standard on genetics and biotechnology supported by the assumptions made and data collected. That means I am now going to the highest stage of proposing an ethical standard, and it is not any arbitrary, but based on some assumptions and the data that is available. So, here action verbs act, create, influence, modify, perform and so on. So, these are the 6 affective levels of the affective domain. Now, in this you have some goals. In the case of cognitive domain, we had cognitive processes and knowledge categories. Here we have affective goals and affective levels. Now, these goals are behavioral goals, procedural goals or substantive goals. Now, behavioral goals are attitudes and values related to rights, feelings and property of others, including the fellow students, teacher and the institution. Now, these are related to, you are talking about behavioral goals, attitudes and values. What attitude do you have towards the, let us say, your teacher, or what attitude do you have towards your students, or what is it that you value when interacting with the teacher. So, these are behavioral goals, and procedural goals are again attitudes and values concerned mainly with demonstrating, like respect for critical thinking. See, critical thinking is a procedure, or objective thinking is a procedure, a logical analysis is a procedure. So, your attitudes and values concerned mainly with demonstrating respect for critical thinking, objectivity, evidence and logical analysis. How serious are you with respect to evidence? If somebody says this is the evidence, if you do not have that procedural goal, you may just discard, I do not care what evidence you have. That means you do not have the right kind of attitude or value towards evidence. Then you can have substantive goals, or attitudes and values related to bigger issues like economic, social, political, ethical and aesthetic questions and issues of importance to a pluralistic society. Do you respect let us say the ethical what do you call ethical values a group people, a group in a society has? Their ethical value is different from maybe ethical value of somebody else. So, you have, especially in a pluralistic society like ours in India, do you have values related to economic, social, political and you can even say environmental, ethical and aesthetic questions. Okay. So, you have 3 levels of goals in the affective domain. Now, what is the role of a teacher in this context? Now, as you can see, all the time we are using the words attitudes and values. Should the teacher merely say you have your value or attitude, I have my value and attitude? Obviously, 2 individuals will have somewhat differing values and attitudes. So, what should the teacher do? One way is to try to avoid the controversy. Do not go even to a question that involves controversy. That means difference between 2 different attitudes or 2 different values. Or sometimes try to be impartial, neutral. Okay, I am an observer, I am not going to express my view. The other one is try to instill in students acceptable values. Acceptable to whom? Acceptable to me, or what the general public says. Now, the other one is these are the things that are considered important. So, I try to instill those values in my students. It can be any of this, as impartial or avoid controversy or instill a set of values acceptable. It may be acceptable to you, but it may not be acceptable to students coming from a different social background. Now, the suggestion is the teacher, it is only a suggestion, the teacher should take the role of a defensible partisanship is appropriate for teachers in a culturally pluralistic and democratically oriented society. What is defensible partisanship? I explain as a teacher, I explain clearly my reasons, I take this position, but it does not mean that I want every one of you to have the same position. Because of if you accept my reasons, you may take this position, but not necessarily the same, because as I have said, the students come from different types of religions, different types of community, different social backgrounds and so on. So, teachers' attitude should be that values are not taught, but they are critically examined. A teacher's role is only to facilitate critical examinations of values, but not taking a particular position, but I take my position and I defend it and present it as my position, that is it. So, that is a recommended role for the teacher. Now, as a practice, give examples of affective outcomes at one or more affective levels on an issue from one of the courses you are familiar with. See, we find in some courses I may or may not be able to go address all the affective levels, but depending on give some examples of affective outcomes at one or more affective levels related to the courses you are familiar with. And in the next unit we will attempt to understand the nature and importance of psychomotor domain in learning. That is the third domain of Bloom's taxonomy. Thank you very much for your attention.